Boston, March 6, 1775. The city is a powder keg with a short, sputtering fuse. For 7 years, the scarlet uniforms of British regulars have been a constant, abrasive presence on its cobblestone streets. Now, under the crushing weight of the coercive acts, or as the colonists call them, the intolerable acts, the city is an occupied territory, its great port sealed, its economy strangled, its elected government dissolved. Every interaction between soldier and citizen is thick with resentment. War is no longer a distant possibility. It is a palpable presence, hanging in the cold March air. Today is the 5th anniversary of the Boston Massacre, a day the patriots have consecrated to memory and defiance. The annual oration is more than a memorial, it is a political act, a direct challenge to the Crown's authority. To the British command, it is a grave insult. Rumors have flown through the city for days. Officers have been heard boasting they would disrupt the proceedings, that they would take the life of any man who should dare to speak of the massacre. The atmosphere is not just tense, it is dangerous. A one-horse carriage clatters to a stop before the Old South Meeting House. A man climbs down, followed by a servant carrying a small bundle. He is Dr. Joseph Warren, a respected physician and, at this moment, the undisputed leader of the Patriot cause in Massachusetts. He crosses the street and enters an apothecary's shop. When he emerges moments later, he is transformed. He is no longer dressed as a doctor, but as a figure from the ancient world, draped in a simple, flowing white Roman toga. Inside the meeting house, the scene is already at a boiling point. An immense crowd of thousands has packed the pews and aisles, but among them, a sea of hostile scarlet stands out. An estimated 300 British officers are present, their uniforms a stark, visual threat. They have deliberately occupied the most prominent seats, some even crowding the steps leading up to the pulpit, a clear and calculated act of intimidation. The main doors are so jammed that Warren cannot enter. Unflustered, he is led to the rear of the building. There, a ladder is raised to a window behind the pulpit. Before the astonished eyes of the assembly, the orator for the day climbs the ladder and enters the hall through the window, a dramatic entrance that sends a jolt of electricity through the crowd. And this is not mere eccentricity, it is political theater of the highest order. By donning the toga, Warren is elevating the conflict beyond a local dispute over taxes. He is casting himself as Cicero, the defender of the Roman Republic, standing against the tyranny of a new Caesar. His unconventional entrance is a powerful statement. No obstacle placed by a military power can prevent the voice of the people from being heard. He is not just a physician, he is the embodiment of a cause, a symbol of primordial virtue confronting imperial force. He reaches the pulpit and looks out over the silent, tense crowd. He begins to speak, his voice clear and steady. He does not shout, he reasons. He lays out a meticulous argument, grounded in philosophy and history, for the colonists' rights. Personal freedom, he declares, is the natural right of every man. He speaks of the right to what one has honestly acquired by his own labor, framing the struggle not as rebellion, but as a defense of fundamental justice. The tension in the room becomes unbearable. A British officer, seated on the pulpit steps just below Warren, makes a move. He slowly raises his hand, opening his palm to reveal several lead musket balls, a silent, deadly threat. The crowd holds its breath. Warren sees the gesture. Without breaking the rhythm of his speech, he calmly takes the white handkerchief from his hand and lets it drop. It flutters down, gently covering the officer's hand and the bullets it holds. The gesture is sublime in its audacity. He has not ignored the threat, he has neutralized it, symbolically covering an act of brute force with a gesture of civility and unshakable resolve. The officer, outmaneuvered, can do nothing. Warren continues, his words building to a crescendo. He knows this speech is a spark falling on dry tinder, with the battles of Lexington and Concord now just over a month away. He assures the assembly that An independence of Great Britain is not our aim." But then he issues a chilling warning, his eyes scanning the faces of the officers before him. He cautions that if all peaceful measures are ineffectual, and it appears that the only way to safety is through fields of blood, I know you will not turn your faces from your foes. The challenge has been issued, not with a sword, but with words. The man in the toga has drawn a line in the sand, leaving everyone in that room and in the colonies beyond to wonder what would happen next. This moment of high drama was the culmination of a decade of rising anger and masterful organization, all of it centered on the doctor who dared to defy an empire. To understand the man in the toga, one must understand the city that forged him. The Boston of 1775 was the product of 10 years of escalating conflict, a slow, grinding process that transformed a loyal colonial outpost into the epicenter of a revolution. The story begins in 1765, with Britain victorious but heavily in debt after the French and Indian War. Seeking new revenue, Parliament passed the Stamp Act, a direct tax on nearly every piece of printed paper the colonists used, from legal documents to playing cards. For the first time, Parliament was imposing an internal tax, not to regulate trade but simply to raise money. The reaction in the colonies was immediate and furious. The cry of "no taxation without representation" echoed from Boston's wharves to Virginia's House of Burgesses. In Boston, a group calling themselves the Sons of Liberty organized protests, sometimes violent, against the tax and the officials appointed to collect it. Merchants, in a powerful show of economic force, entered into non-importation agreements, boycotting the British goods that were the lifeblood of the empire's economy. Faced with this unified resistance, a stunned Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. It was a major victory for the colonists, but it was fleeting. On the very same day, Parliament passed the Declaratory Act, a stark assertion of its absolute authority to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. The fundamental disagreement was now clear. The colonists believed they possessed certain entrenched rights as subjects of the Crown, while Parliament believed they were subordinates to be governed at will. The fragile peace did not last. In 1767, Chancellor of the Exchequer Charles Townshend pushed through a new round of taxes on essential imports: glass, lead, paint, paper, and most fatefully, tea. To enforce these new duties and crack down on smuggling, a new American Board of Customs was established in Boston, backed by the power of the Royal Navy and broad warrants known as writs of assistance, which allowed officials to search private property at will. When Bostonians again resisted, London decided to make an example of the city. In October 1768, regiments of British regular soldiers, their red coats a vibrant symbol of imperial power, marched into Boston and began a military occupation. The presence of nearly 2,000 soldiers in a town with a population of just 16,000 was a constant source of friction. Soldiers and civilians competed for jobs, lodging, and dignity. Daily life became a series of small humiliations and simmering confrontations. Brawls were common. Resentment festered. This volatile situation finally exploded on the cold night of March 5, 1770. A confrontation between a lone British sentry and a group of Bostonians escalated rapidly. A crowd gathered, taunting the soldiers who came to reinforce the sentry. Snowballs and rocks were thrown. In the confusion and fear, a volley of shots rang out. When the smoke cleared, 5 civilians lay dead or dying in the snow, among them a dock worker of African and indigenous descent named Crispus Attucks. In the aftermath, Dr. Joseph Warren was among those who tended to the wounded, giving him a direct, visceral understanding of the human cost of this political struggle. The event was immediately labeled the Boston Massacre, a powerful piece of propaganda that depicted British tyranny written in the blood of American citizens. The years that followed saw a tense quiet, with Parliament repealing most of the Townshend duties, except for the tax on tea, which was left in place as a symbol of their authority. Then, in 1773, came the Tea Act. It was not a new tax, but a corporate bailout for the struggling British East India Company, granting it a monopoly on the American tea trade. This move undercut colonial merchants, many of whom were smugglers and key figures in the Patriot movement, like John Hancock. The colonists saw it as a trick to get them to accept Parliament's right to tax them. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of men, thinly disguised as Mohawk Indians, boarded 3 tea ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water, an act of defiance that would become known as the Boston Tea Party. Parliament's response was no longer about taxes or trade. It was about punishment. In 1774, it passed a series of laws designed to break Boston's spirit. The Boston Port Act closed the harbor until the tea was paid for, devastating the city's economy. The Massachusetts Government Act effectively abolished the colony's charter, placing the election of most officials under the control of the Crown and severely restricting town meetings. A new Quartering Act allowed the governor to house troops in occupied buildings. These were the Intolerable Acts. Instead of isolating Massachusetts, they had the opposite effect. The other colonies watched in horror, realizing that if Parliament could do this to Boston, it could do it to any of them. They rallied in support, sending supplies to the besieged city. The stage was set for a unified continental resistance, and at its center was the calm, determined physician who was about to step fully into the light. The city was on the brink, and Dr. Warren was preparing to push it over. Joseph Warren was, by all accounts, a man of immense charm and talent. A portrait painted around 1765 shows a handsome, fair-faced young gentleman, elegantly dressed with a kindly expression. Born in the nearby farming town of Roxbury, he was a graduate of Harvard College who, at the young age of 22, chose to remain in Boston during a terrifying smallpox epidemic in 1764, inoculating hundreds of citizens, including a young lawyer named John Adams. This act of courage and public service cemented his reputation. His medical practice grew to become one of the largest and most successful in Boston. His practice was unique in its breadth. His ledgers show a patient list that cut across every line of class, politics, and social standing in the divided city. He treated the wealthiest loyalists, including the Royal Lieutenant Governor, Thomas Hutchinson, and the most ardent patriots, like Samuel Adams and Paul Revere. He also treated the poor and disenfranchised, sometimes canceling their debts or accepting payment in flour or shoes. This position afforded him a level of trust and access that was unparalleled. He was respected by all, even by his political enemies, as a healer dedicated to the well-being of his community. This public persona, however, concealed a second, more dangerous life. Warren's medical practice was the perfect cover for a revolutionary organizer. His daily rounds took him to every corner of the city at all hours, allowing him to move about without raising suspicion. His house calls gave him entry into the homes of British officials and humble artisans alike, making him a human listening post, perfectly positioned to gauge public opinion, gather information, and identify potential allies. His medical office became more than a place of healing. It was a clandestine hub for the Patriot cause, a safe space where plans could be laid and intelligence could be shared. His doctor's bag, in essence, became a tool of revolution. Beginning in 1765, with the passage of the Stamp Act, Warren began to wield another powerful instrument, his pen. He wrote a series of incisive articles for the Boston Gazette, the city's most radical newspaper. At first, he used pseudonyms like A True Patriot, but his writing was so pointed and effective that the royal governor attempted to have him and the paper's publishers charged with libel. As his confidence grew, he began to write under his own name, lending the full weight of his reputation as a respected physician to the Patriot cause. He became a central figure in the interlocking network of secret societies and committees that formed the backbone of the resistance. He was an active member of the Sons of Liberty, the group responsible for organizing street-level protests and enforcing boycotts. He was a high-ranking Freemason in St. Andrew's Lodge, a fraternal organization that included many key patriots, among them his close friend, the silversmith Paul Revere. These organizations provided a ready-made structure for secret communication and coordination. Perhaps most importantly, Warren was instrumental in the creation of the Committees of Correspondence in 1772, alongside Samuel Adams and James Otis. This was a stroke of strategic genius. The committees created a formal communication channel linking towns throughout Massachusetts and, eventually, all 13 colonies. They wrote and distributed pamphlets, shared news of British actions, and coordinated a unified response. They effectively transformed the traditional New England town meeting from a forum for local matters into an engine of revolutionary politics, debating the rights of man and the limits of parliamentary power. No other leader in Boston was involved in so many critical organizations at once. While Samuel Adams was the fiery ideologue and John Hancock was the wealthy patron, Joseph Warren was the master organizer, the central node through which flowed the information, strategy, and energy of the entire movement. He was the man who connected the intellectuals with the street brawlers, the merchants with the mechanics, weaving the disparate threads of discontent into a coherent and formidable revolutionary force. His public life as a healer gave him legitimacy and access. His secret life as an agitator and organizer gave him power. It was this unique duality that allowed him to become the most important man in Boston. The Boston Tea Party of December 1773 was a decisive turning point. While the event is often depicted as a spontaneous act of public outrage, it was, in fact, a carefully planned operation, and Dr. Joseph Warren was one of its principal orchestrators, working behind the scenes with Samuel Adams and others. In the aftermath, as a furious Parliament forged the intolerable acts to punish the city, Warren stepped from the shadows into a position of overt leadership. As the Boston Port Act took effect in June 1774, he was appointed to the Committee of Donations, tasked with the critical job of receiving and distributing the aid that poured in from other colonies to help Boston's citizens survive the economic strangulation. That summer, a crucial leadership vacuum opened in Massachusetts. The most prominent Patriot figures, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, were preparing to travel to Philadelphia as delegates to the First Continental Congress. With their departure, the movement in Boston, the very heart of the resistance, needed a new leader to take command on the ground. Joseph Warren, trusted by all factions and now deeply experienced in every facet of the revolutionary machine, was the undisputed choice. He effectively shouldered the immense responsibilities that Adams had carried, becoming the chief executive of the rebellion in Massachusetts. His first major test came in response to the most galling of the intolerable acts, the Massachusetts Government Act, which unilaterally revoked the colony's 1691 charter and stripped its people of their right to self-government. In defiance, delegates from the towns in Suffolk County, which included Boston, convened in September 1774. It was here that Dr. Warren produced his political masterpiece. He was the primary author of a document that would come to be known as the Suffolk Resolves. The Resolves were unlike any protest that had come before. They were not a plea for redress. They were a blueprint for revolution. The document declared the intolerable acts to be a violation of natural rights and the English Constitution and therefore declared them null and void. It called on the people of Massachusetts to form their own government, to collect their own taxes, and to withhold them from the Crown's officials. It urged a complete and total boycott of all British goods and trade, and, in its most audacious and consequential clause, it called for the towns to establish, arm, and train their own militias in preparation for the defense of their freedoms. This was a radical leap. Previous colonial arguments had been framed within the context of their rights as loyal British subjects. Warren's resolves functionally declared Massachusetts an independent entity, operating under its own authority until its rights were restored. It was a document that provided not just the philosophical justification for rebellion, but the practical framework to carry it out. It was, in essence, a Declaration of Independence in all but name, nearly 2 years before the more famous document was signed in Philadelphia. The ink was barely dry when Paul Revere was dispatched on horseback, carrying the Suffolk Resolves south to the Continental Congress. On September 17, 1774, the Congress gave the document its full and unqualified endorsement. This was a pivotal moment for the entire continent. By backing the resolves, the delegates from 12 colonies were unifying behind Massachusetts' most radical position. They were signaling to London that an attack on one colony's rights would be considered an attack on all. The resolves directly inspired the creation of the Continental Association, a colony-wide agreement to enforce the boycott against Britain, creating a coordinated economic weapon of unprecedented power. Back in Massachusetts, the effect was electric. In October, defying the new law, a revolutionary government called the Massachusetts Provincial Congress was formed. Dr. Joseph Warren was elected its president. He now held the highest political office in the rebellion. From this position, he directed the final preparations for a conflict that now seemed inevitable. He oversaw the Committee of Safety, which was charged with gathering military intelligence and coordinating the new militias. He worked to procure arms and gunpowder, stockpiling them in secret caches in towns outside of British-occupied Boston. He was no longer just a doctor, writer, or organizer. He was the commander-in-chief of a government in waiting, preparing his people for war. By the spring of 1775, Dr. Joseph Warren was not only the political head of the Massachusetts Rebellion, he was its spymaster. His medical office, once a simple place of healing, had transformed into the nerve center of a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation. As president of the Provincial Congress and a leader of its powerful Committee of Safety, Warren was charged with a monumental task: to know the British military's intentions before they acted, and to be ready to alarm, muster, and cause to be assembled the colonial militia at a moment's notice. His life and the fate of the Revolution now depended on the quality of his information. His network was not built on a single, well-placed source, but on a web of dozens of ordinary people, a testament to the trust he had cultivated across all levels of Boston society. His agents were everywhere. They were stable boys who overheard conversations while tending to the horses of British officers. They were maids and servants working in the homes of loyalists and British officials. They were sailors on the docks who noted which ships were being prepared and when the naval longboats were being launched for amphibious operations. Every snippet of gossip, every unusual troop movement, every strange order flowed from the streets and wharves of Boston directly to Dr. Warren's office. Warren's genius was not just in creating this network, but in his ability to analyze the intelligence it produced. He acted less like a spymaster of fiction and more like a modern intelligence analyst, piecing together a mosaic from countless small, seemingly insignificant details to reveal a larger pattern. In the weeks leading up to April 19th, the flow of information intensified. On April 8th and again on the 15th, Paul Revere rode out on what turned out to be false alarms, a sign of both the high state of alert and Warren's caution. He would not risk mobilizing the entire countryside without firm evidence. He knew that a premature alarm could be just as damaging as no alarm at all. On Tuesday, April 18th, the pieces began to fall into place with alarming speed. Reports flooded in. An unusual number of British officers were seen gathering on the Long Wharf. A light infantryman was spotted in a shop with his full campaign gear on. Sailors came ashore to man the longboats. Just before nightfall, a party of mounted British scouts was seen riding out of the city via the Boston Neck, clearly to patrol the roads leading west. Warren synthesized this information. The target was almost certainly the cache of Patriot arms and powder stockpiled in Concord, and the route would likely take the British troops through Lexington, where Samuel Adams and John Hancock were staying. Around 8 p.m., with the evidence mounting but still not conclusive, Warren made a preliminary move. He summoned a tanner named William Dawes, a man known for his ability to slip past the British guards on the Boston Neck. Warren dispatched Dawes on the long overland route to Lexington, but with a specific instruction to deliver a warning to Adams and Hancock, but not to raise a general alarm. Warren still feared a third false alarm and needed one more piece of definitive proof before setting the entire colony in motion. That final proof arrived around 10 p.m. The exact source of the final critical piece of intelligence died with Warren 2 months later, but it was enough to confirm his suspicions beyond any doubt. The British were moving that very night. He sent an urgent message for Paul Revere. When Revere arrived, Warren laid out the situation. The king's troops were embarking in boats, crossing the Charles River to Cambridge, and from there would march to Lexington and Concord. Their mission was to seize the colonial stores and, quite possibly, to capture and arrest Adams and Hancock on charges of treason. The time for caution was over. Warren gave his final orders. Revere was to take the faster route by sea, crossing the river by rowboat under the shadow of the warship HMS Somerset, and then riding hard for Lexington. As a failsafe, Warren had already arranged for a signal to be sent from the steeple of the Old North Church. 1 lantern if the British were marching by land over the Boston Neck, 2 if they were coming by sea across the river. The signal would alert patriots watching from Charlestown, ensuring the message would get out even if Revere were captured. With his 2 riders galloping into the darkness by separate paths, Joseph Warren, the doctor turned spymaster, remained in the heart of the occupied city, having just unleashed the whirlwind. As the first shots of the American Revolution echoed across Lexington Green on the morning of April 19, 1775, Joseph Warren was not waiting for news in Boston. He slipped out of the city and rode directly toward the sound of the guns. He was no longer just a political leader. He was a combatant. Linking up with General William Heath, Warren helped to coordinate the swarms of militia who descended upon the retreating British column, transforming their march back to Boston into a grueling 20-mile fight for survival. Throughout that bloody day, he acted as both an officer and a physician, joining in the skirmishes against the Redcoats and then, moments later, treating the wounds of the fallen patriots. When his mother learned of his close calls with danger, she pleaded with him not to risk his life again. His reply was a testament to his unwavering resolve. "Where danger is, dear mother," he wrote, "there must your son be. I will either set my country free or shed my last drop of blood to make her so." In the weeks that followed, as the newly formed New England Army laid siege to the British in Boston, Warren was the undisputed center of the Revolution. As president of the Provincial Congress, he was the head of the civil government, working tirelessly to recruit soldiers, organize supplies, and negotiate with the British command. On June 14, 1775, in recognition of his leadership, the Congress commissioned him a major general in the Massachusetts forces, second in command of the colony's army. Just 3 days later, on June 17th, intelligence reached the Patriot headquarters in Cambridge. The British were planning to break out of Boston and seize the unoccupied hills of Charlestown that overlooked the city. In a daring overnight move, colonial troops under Colonel William Prescott marched to the peninsula and constructed a small earthen redoubt on Breed's Hill. When Warren learned that a battle was imminent, he did not hesitate. He left the safety of the Congress and rode to join the men on the front line. When he arrived at the redoubt, both Colonel Prescott and General Israel Putnam offered to yield command to him, acknowledging his superior rank. Warren refused. "I shall take no command here," he reportedly said. "I have not yet received my commission. I came as a volunteer with my musket to serve under you." It was a profound and deliberate act. By declining command, the highest-ranking leader in Massachusetts was making a powerful statement. In this new army of citizens, a leader shared the same dangers as the men he led. He borrowed a musket and took his place in the trenches, not as a general, but as a private soldier, ready to face the enemy on equal terms. The battle that followed was one of the most ferocious of the entire war. From their fortified position, the colonial militia watched as waves of disciplined British regulars advanced up the hill. Twice, the Patriots held their fire until the last possible moment, unleashing devastating volleys that tore through the British ranks and sent the survivors reeling back down the slope. But the British, with grim determination, reformed and advanced a third time. By now, the colonists' ammunition was nearly exhausted. As the redcoats, climbing over the bodies of their fallen comrades, finally surged over the walls of the redoubt, the fighting dissolved into a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. Warren fought until the very end. He remained with a small group of soldiers near the rear of the redoubt, providing covering fire to allow the majority of the militia to retreat. In the final, chaotic moments of the assault, as the British poured over the earthworks, an officer who recognized the Patriot leader took aim. A single shot struck Warren in the face just below his left eye. Forensic analysis of his skull, recovered months later, shows a small entry wound and a massive exit wound at the back of his head, indicating the blow was instantly fatal. There were no heroic last words, no final speech. He fell at the age of 34. In the aftermath, his body was stripped and repeatedly bayoneted by enraged soldiers before being cast into a shallow, unmarked grave with another fallen colonist. When the British commander, General Thomas Gage, heard that Warren was dead, he reportedly remarked that the loss of this one man was worth 500 of his own troops. From her home in Braintree, watching the smoke rise from a burning Charlestown and listening to the ceaseless roar of the cannons, Abigail Adams wrote a letter to her husband John, then in Philadelphia. I have just heard that our dear friend Dr. Warren is no more but fell gloriously fighting for his country. Great is our loss.